Elmhurst is one of the most fun courses of this entire Intelligentsia series. It's fast, and it was repaved last year, and there are some really nice little chicanes that you can really get an advantage on if you're up front. I got a good starting position and managed to get clipped in right away as well. This gave me a pretty good position in the field to start with, and I was feeling pretty good, so I took to the front immediately to try and drive the pace a little bit. The next 3 corners are the main feature of the course, and the first 2 are pretty quick. Taking the right line through them can get you a decent gap on the field, and although I didn't take them as fast or as perfect as I could have, when I looked back to see where the field was, I already noticed that a gap had opened up. I kept on the pedals, but I wasn't about to smash myself really hard before this first lap was even over. This is the last corner on the course. It's a little tricky because of the asphalt. As you come out of the corner, if you don't keep the line tight inside, you have to come across the crown of the road at speed, and it can kind of offset your balance a little bit. As we come to the end of the first lap, the rider in front of me pulls off slightly, so I continue to pull through. Again, my legs were feeling relatively good, but I do end up paying for these pulls a little later. 2 riders attack up the right here, and that's a pretty cool move, especially up into the corners. The 2 riders in front of me don't really react, and you'll notice as we go through these corners, the gap starts to open up. With the field stretched out, the rider in front of me starts to sit up a little. I wanted to try and be in any move I could during this race, so I jumped the gap and worked my way back up to the group ahead. The pace is pretty high, which is going to discourage other attacks, so most other riders are just going to sit on. As we come out of the last corner, I can see that the one rider who ended up being a bit ahead of us has sat up, and the few riders in front of me are starting to slow down too. Instead of waiting for a counterattack to happen, I decide to be proactive and launch one myself. I know that everyone at this point wants to recover a bit, and since this section is slightly uphill, it will be even more discouragement to follow my move. I'm off the front at this point, so I know that if I can carry some decent speed through these few corners, I'll only increase my lead. During the race, I kind of felt that I was doing a pretty good job of that, but when I go back and watch it now, I was grabbing brakes when I really didn't need to be, and that probably ended up costing me time, and I could have picked up even more time had I realized that I was grabbing brake and adjusted. This is actually something I'm working on improving, and as I become more and more comfortable with hitting corners at speed, I can only hope to improve. 2 riders have managed to bridge up to me, and they're from the 2 other biggest teams in the field. So my thought is, even though it's still relatively early in the race, I'm pretty sure that this breakaway has a chance of sticking. I'm really happy to see these guys, as it means that I can get a few seconds of respite after putting in this really big effort. After 1 lap off the front, we've got a pretty large gap, and I decide at this point that I'm going to bury myself to try and make this breakaway work. If it doesn't end up working though, and we get brought back, then I'm probably going to struggle to stick onto the rest of the field. With the 3 of us coming up to the chicane, we have a really good chance again to make even more time here. Unfortunately, the rider on the front grabbed a bunch of brake through each of the corners. He wasn't really that comfortable in them, and that means that we weren't going as fast as we really needed to be. After quite a few laps off the front, the field does manage to bring us back. During the race, and even now, it's hard for me to think what we could have done differently. We had the 3 biggest teams in the break, and their teammates were working to slow the chase down, and I was really putting in a lot of effort to try and stay away. There were plenty of other really strong riders in the field, so in the end it just seems that they were able to get organized enough to close down the gap. I'm a little annoyed and pretty deep in the tank at this point, so I immediately fall back through the field and try to find a draft and hopefully recover enough to finish well. Out of the corner here, a couple riders in front of me accelerate a little bit, and you'll see that I struggle to match it, and I begin to let a gap open up. This wasn't intentional, and I began to have a hard time keeping pace, so more and more riders come around me to close the gap. Tired of having to accelerate so hard out of the corners, I decide to try and move up further through the field when the pace slows a little bit. Unfortunately, as I moved to the outside, the door got shut on me, and the rider in blue tries to move up a little bit as well. The pace has picked up significantly as there are riders near the front who are trying to split the field. I'm trying with everything I have at this point to stick on wheels, and luckily I'm able to hop back in as the field slows through a corner. Here, I begin to coast and try and recover a little bit more while staying in the draft, but in reality I really should have kept pedaling, because as you'll see in a second here, I go from about the top 10 to 12 places to almost dead last in the field, all because I chose to sit up for a few seconds. And this is going to make it a whole lot harder as I now have to match all the accelerations and braking out of the corners from the back. You can see just how far I've fallen back and how stretched out the field really is. And I have to jump out of every corner, which is pretty hard when I'm running near empty from the breakaway earlier in the race. I keep falling further and further back, only managing to catch up through the corners, which I then have to accelerate out of. This is not a good place for me to be, and the gap starts to open up as I can no longer match the jumps from the back of the group. The elastic finally snaps for me, and I just feel like I can't go on at that pace anymore as the wheels fall off. I was frustrated at the end of the race with my performance through the second half. I know that I put a ton of effort in to try and make the breakaway stay, but I should have been more conscious of my positioning and effort level once we got back into the group. This is definitely a race that I'll keep in my head for both things I did well and things that needed work. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button, and if you want to see more from me in the future, click the red subscribe button.